So now that Peacemaker Season 2 is over, I wanted to make a video giving some of my thoughts on it, because I think that this season has some of the greatest character work and some of the greatest acting in a James Gunn project we've ever seen, but is largely let down by its commitment towards overall world building. But not in the same way the MCU projects suffer. Let me explain. I'm not just making this video to complain about the finale because it didn't have a bunch of cameos and the Batman or Superman or whatever didn't show up. That's not the crux of my criticism. However, James Gunn himself implying that there are going to be big cameos in these last 3 episodes, I kind of understand why people would be disappointed that Superman didn't show up. Especially due to this show's hype as connective tissue towards Man of Tomorrow, which, if you aren't somebody that can really read between the lines of these next upcoming projects or like really pays attention to the comic allegories they're pulling from, you have no idea what any of this possibly means in terms of like a setup. But I think the finale has been unsatisfying for many people due to the structural issues that the season has now presented given the challenge that Christopher Smith was supposed to face. The ending of Season 1 already has Christopher Smith doing something incredibly heroic and willing to put his life on the line for the entire world. Following up on that with the scene in Episode 1 where he attempts to join the Justice Gang because he truly believes he is on that tier of heroism, but then he gets rejected because he, kills people and doesn't have powers. That makes sense, and it sets up a grander arc of heroism for Chris to follow that ultimately doesn't get followed up on outside of the Earth X storyline, which kind of just disappears in Episode 7, and we really don't know if that's ever going to come back.
I don't want to be a joke anymore, Rats. This is all I've ever wanted, to be a real hero.
Are you for real? They're gonna be doing backflips to get you to join.
Structurally, Season 1 did something very similar, having Chris start out as he's perceived as just a racist bum in a hospital and not a real superhero. And then throughout that season, he has to do something heroic, even though he may not get the notability for it. Because the real heroes, the Justice Gang, show up in the end to clear everything up. Structuring the season in such a way so that Chris is constantly in his second act low point in every episode, and then finally at the end of the season, he finally gets some character growth and some positivity in his life in the form of other people becoming more proactive suddenly. It's not very satisfying. Like, the idea that the finale is Harcourt revealing her feelings to Chris and not Chris doing something heroic when the promotional material and the clear setup from the beginning of the season was a story about Chris facing his ideals and how much he wants to be a hero. A big reason why people liked Season 1 so much is that it wasn't afraid to be a superhero thing. It blended together comedy, potential romantic themes, violence, etc., all together within one plot that made it feel like a comic book story. The characters wore their costumes because they weren't ashamed to be. However, in this, Chris is basically just wearing his clothes all the time. Most of the people that we're seeing are just government agents, and the central plot really isn't about heroism. It's about a guy going to an alternate dimension with Nazis that is just his personal fantasy because his family exists. Like, it's an incredibly personal story about Christopher Smith, but it's not a story about Peacemaker. And really, Vigilante suits up in this season more than Peacemaker does in a show called Peacemaker. But Season 1 at least had the good sense of setting it up in such a way where even if Peacemaker wasn't recognized as this global hero like Superman, like Batman, etc., he was still a hero in the hearts of the people around him. The people that knew the truth of Project Butterfly could revile him as a hero. Okay. Rick Flag might just be a walking plot hole in this universe. Let me explain. The Rick Flag that we see in Creature Commandos is supposed to be the same Rick Flag that we see in this, which I understand from a meta perspective, the Creature Commandos was likely greenlit before James Gunn had even taken control of DC Studios and was always just going to be a passion project starring characters that were loosely connected to ideas that he liked. I can look past them not looking alike, but across 3 different projects, he has had basically 3 different personalities, which I think from James Gunn's perspective is supposed to be like a 3-act structure of a side character, like flipping his morality, or at least like the audience being able to see how someone's morality can be perceived from different angles. In Creature Commandos, you see him as a hero. In Superman, you see him as a more neutral figure, being somebody that works for the government and is just doing his job. And then in Peacemaker, you see him as a more personal threat to Chris from his perspective, making him an antagonist. And this is a multi-layered and nuanced approach towards writing a character that I would normally appreciate, but its execution within the DCU so far has been somewhat lackluster. Within the last calendar year in-universe, Rick Flag was personally pursuing Lex Luthor because of the Quantum Unfolding Chamber and the danger that it presents to this world. His entire gimmick for chasing Peacemaker through this season, and the way that he can justify it, is by saying that he is trying to stop another Luthor-like incident. And then no one within the government tries to step in or do anything whenever he is clearly enacting a more accelerated version of Lex Luthor's plan, while literally communicating with people in on the Lex Luthor plot. And I would like to believe that the government maybe is just this inept in this universe, and that you could be ultra good faith and say that the government is just stupid. However, clearly the DC universe exists inside of a hellish surveillance state. Even if you are somebody that works with the Suicide Squad, goes with the mission, and then gets let out of prison after saving the Earth, Argus still has access to a GPS chip in your brain that could blow up your head.
So he's on the run? Can't you track him with that chip in his head?
John and I have had our clearance with anything Peacemaker related rescinded, so no.
Where the f could he be?
No, please no! Phosphorus, you idiot! You think Waller would give me the only remote? You'd be hopping around like a Mexican jumping bean for days if you escaped. Or if I told her about this. I'm not here to torture you. We're supposed to be on the same damn team.
And then, world building implications aside, then we have to get into like the logistics of the season itself. Rick Flag Sr. wants nothing more than to be able to kill Peacemaker, including in the impersonal way of sending him to an alternate dimension and allowing him to be killed by something that he will never even know what killed him, including starvation or drowning. Who knows what lies beyond that one grassy field on Salvation that we've seen. The point is, he's not somebody that has a moral conviction so strong that he wants Peacemaker to see justice via the law, or else he would have allowed him to see trial. And he's not someone that has a personal conviction so strong that he would allow him to be personally killed by him, or well, he would have just murdered him in Salvation. So why didn't he just blow up his head the entire season? If he has had access to a GPS tracker that is also a bomb that Amanda Waller placed for the Corto Maltese mission, he should have went bye-bye, like way before any of the Earth X stuff happened. And especially the first time he came back. And now that he handed over the mother box or whatever that he's using to open up the QUC, there's literally no reason that Rick Flag doesn't just pop his head. And again, the moral inconsistency, it's hard for me to believe that this guy truly believes that Christopher Smith is a unique outlier to the American law and he needs to be trapped in Salvation on a similar level of danger to other metahumans, but he allows Lex Luthor to stay on Earth and gives him, allow him to switch to other prisons that are better for him than staying in one of the metahumans. The idea that Rick Flag has any sort of morality left after the way he's presented in Peacemaker Season 2 is lunacy to me, and it doesn't even seem really consistent for the way that someone would act. This isn't somebody that's trying to uphold the moral values that their son held, not somebody that's trying to lead a better example. If you want to write a story about a vengeful psychopath, James Gunn, just do it, but don't create world-building contrivances that make him not able to fully pursue his beliefs with his full power. If the show ended in episode 7, this plot hole wouldn't exist. Simply put. Nobody since season 1 of Peacemaker has even thought about the fact that he has potentially had a GPS tracker in his head. If the government had it whenever the butterflies had occupied the government, they probably would have used it to kill Peacemaker then, because they knew that he wanted to wipe out their entire race. Basically, by referencing the chip that is in his head and establishing that Argus has connection to it, and now that the Luthor Corp computers can connect to it because they're working with Argus, this establishes a whole can of worms in which there are people in this universe that can just instant kill members of the Suicide Squad, people that have worked for Amanda Waller, etc., or just straight up just track them down and go kill them even if the bombs are disabled. Either way, this creates a contrivance for previous parts of the season where Rick Flag was trying to find Peacemaker. At any point where he wasn't in Earth X, he should have been able to track him down, arrest him, or kill him, whatever he wanted to do. If the show was going to be consistent, I would imagine that he would want to kill him, but then again, whenever he finally gets a chance and he abducts him at his motel inexplicably, I don't know how they're going to explain that to the government whenever they see that on security cameras, he just throws him in a multiversal prison. He doesn't even get the personal satisfaction of watching Peacemaker die. So I'm just not convinced that Rick Flag is doing this for any sense of personal satisfaction. Overall, I think it's been a very enjoyable season, but there's just been some misses. I wish that he would have been in his costume more. I wish that Peacemaker himself would have gotten more screen time to be able to truly be himself and to be a hero like the first episode is kind of setting up. And if people are upset about there not being cameos, I kind of can't blame you because, well, at least that would have been something enticing. I'm still very hopeful for James Gunn's DCU, very excited for Lanterns and Woman of Tomorrow, and I think that right now the DCU needs needs a breath of fresh air in the form of something that's not directed by James Gunn. If we can see what this universe can look like whenever other creatives have their hands into it, finally potentially building up to some sort of crossover of the Justice League and letting us see our true GOAT Batman, I do still think that there's hope. This season, this episode, really just a small misstep, perhaps. The season overall, I would say, is good, and as long as these characters and some of the world building that is established is followed up on in a satisfying way, we could still have an amazing cinematic universe ahead of us. But I also need to check my biases. Just because I love James Gunn, just because I love Peacemaker, and I love Superman, that doesn't mean I'm going to lie to myself. This episode was kind of some mid, and it would be passable if it was just called, like, Peacemaker Episode 8 Epilogue or something, but it was called a regular episode title. There was the implication that it was an hour long. Like, we saw big VFX CGI shots of, like, aliens and stuff, like, in the alternate universes in the trailers. There was an expectation that something was going to happen this episode, even if it was just like a final, like, emotional fight sequence between Peacemaker and his brother from Earth X. But we didn't even get that. No mention of that, no follow-up to the Earth X storyline. And now Rick Flag has a way to contort the QUC so that way he can go directly to Salvation. So we may not even see the QUC properly again, because Peacemaker doesn't even have the Mother Box anymore. So overall, it leaves some hanging plot threads. It potentially sets things up that I hope are followed up on in Lanterns and Woman of Tomorrow. But overall, I would say that if the show would have ended at episode 8, it would have been more satisfying. Like, Peacemaker going to prison and just ending it there would have at least left us with it would be sort of like bittersweet. We would know that he's safe. We would know that he still handed over the Mother Box to try and, like, save his friends, his newfound family, because he gave up I guess the fake biological family of Earth X. That would have at least been a meaningful, somewhat heroic sacrifice. But structuring it in such a way that episode 8 seems like it's going to be the big finale, hour-long, cameos from Foxy Shazam and James Gunn himself. Like, it really does just seem kind of corny. And I'm very much hoping that the future of DC movies and television can have a little bit better finales than this. Because Creature Commandos also didn't have a very strong finale. That was a lot of people's criticism of that. So it seems like maybe James Gunn just needs somebody to punch up his scripts when it comes to finale episodes. Maybe he feels too unrestricted to lean into his own tropes. It was a little bit self-aggrandizing whenever he had 2 random concert sequences of his wife just, like, dancing to music that he likes. I don't know. It's not really what the audience is looking for, Jimmy Goon. Anyway, I hope all of you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to try to get that Fantastic Four video out sometime soon. It's going to be a big one. I had pages and upon pages of thoughts. If more Cape Slop comes out soon, I'm sure I'll talk about it. And I hope all of you have a fantastic day. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the That's Weird Bro YouTube channel, and leave your comments down below about what you think about the Peacemaker finale and the future of James Gunn's DC universe. I appreciate talking to all of you, and thank you all for the support in the last video. Thank you so much, and have a blessed day. Peace out.